A cocky karate master tried to embarrass a silent royal guard until the guard moved. He regretted it immediately. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and follow for more powerful stories that will stay with you. Now let's begin. On a bright, cloudless afternoon, families wandered the expansive lawns. Camera shutters clicked in a constant rhythm, and local guides shared colorful tales of American presidents and historic triumphs. The day had the air of a perfect summer outing until an unsettling current began to disturb the harmony. That disturbance came in the form of Jack Randall. At 35, he moved through the crowd like a force of nature, an energy impossible to ignore. With sharp gray eyes, a chiseled jawline, and a build that could easily intimidate, Jack wore confidence like a second skin. His snug, athletic tee clung to his muscular frame, a silent boast of years spent in dojos and training gyms. As he casually tossed a water bottle from hand to hand, it was clear he wasn't just there to sightsee. Jack had once been a karate champion back in the States, but his glory days hadn't dulled his arrogance. Instead of admiring the ceremonial discipline of the American honor guard stationed nearby, he scoffed at it. "You see these guys?" he said with a mocking grin, his voice slicing through the gentle hum of conversation. "They're just mannequins in fancy uniforms." Several tourists turned to look at him, disapproval written across their faces, but Jack welcomed the attention. "Jack, dude, chill out," one of his friends muttered, clearly uneasy. "It's just protocol. A tradition." Jack raised an eyebrow and smirked. "Tradition? Come on, I could wipe the floor with them. I bet not one of those guys could throw a decent punch." He glanced toward the nearest guard, eyes gleaming with mischief. His words didn't go unnoticed. Phones were suddenly lifted. Whispers filled the air, and the people around him instinctively began to back away, creating a small circle of tension. Standing rigid, just steps from Jack, was Richard Hunt, one of the elite ceremonial guards assigned to the White House that day. Tall and statuesque Richard wore the crisp, dark blue of his uniform. With pride, gold accents glimmered in the sun, and his expression was calm, unreadable. His eyes, hidden behind a pair of regulation sunglasses, gave nothing away. But the subtle clench of his jaw betrayed the fact that he was fully aware of the brewing confrontation. Years of military discipline had taught Richard a simple rule: remain unfazed. No matter the provocation, you don't react. You endure. Jack, however, couldn't resist pushing further. "Watch this," he whispered to his crew, his voice thick with excitement. "Let's give them something to remember." The atmosphere shifted. Tourists leaned in, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread. The open space between Jack and Richard seemed charged, like the calm just before a storm. "Hey!" Jack shouted, crossing closer to the guardrails. His voice rang out crisp and loud. "You even breathing, soldier? Or are you just part of the lawn decor?" Richard didn't move, didn't blink. He remained the perfect image of restraint. Jack's smirk widened. "I'll bet you $100, he said, laughing, turning toward his friends. "One swing and he won't even blink. What do you think?" The crowd gasped, some in disbelief, others in indignation. Phones continued to roll. Whatever happened next, it would be captured and remembered. "This is getting out of hand," an older woman murmured under her breath, her fingers tightening around the arm of a younger couple standing beside her. "Someone should do something," a man in a charcoal blazer added, keeping his phone raised and perfectly still to record the growing tension. But no one made a move. Jack's imposing stature and volatile energy had created an invisible wall around him. No one dared to cross it. Meanwhile, Richard remained composed, the very image of discipline, though behind his stillness his gaze had turned colder, sharper, fixed on the man now pushing the limits. Encouraged by the crowd's silence and the guard's restraint, Jack took another bold step forward. His grin curled into something more sinister, something primal. "What's the matter?" he mocked, leaning in over the barricade. "Cat got your tongue." The jeer hung in the air like smoke, foul and lingering. "Let's see how tough you really are." The atmosphere turned suffocating. Each tick of the second hand stretched unbearably long. There was a collective pause among the bystanders, a breath caught in every chest, as Jack leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Come on, ready to drop that whole tough guy act?" For Richard, silence wasn't just protocol, it was purpose, it was pride. Beneath the stoic exterior, every fiber of his training buzzed with awareness. Ready for the line Jack seemed intent on crossing. Around them, the square just outside the White House felt suspended in time, caught between spectacle and storm. The usual chatter of tourists had faded to nothing. All that remained was the silence, heavy and expectant, broken only by Jack Randall's voice. He moved through the onlookers like a man taking center stage, every step deliberate, every gesture designed to draw focus. "Hey, soldier boy!" he called out again, voice rising as he advanced toward the edge of the security line. "Come on, show us what you've got, or are you just another lawn ornament?" The crowd winced at the volume of his taunt, many now openly filming their screens glowing in the afternoon light. Jack caught their attention and grinned. He loved it. The stares, the phones, the whispered gasps. He was performing and the audience was his. A few feet away, Richard stood tall, his uniform immaculate beneath the sun, the gold trim catching the light, his tall bearskin-style ceremonial cap giving him an air of silent command. Despite the growing provocation, his face remained impassive, but inside the tension was coiling. This wasn't some harmless heckler. This was a man pushing too far. "You don't hear me, huh?" Jack taunted again, stepping even closer to the railing. His gray eyes locked on Richard's face, reading for any flicker of emotion, any hint that he was getting under the man's skin. "Or maybe you can't move unless someone winds you up." Richard didn't budge. His posture never faltered, eyes forward, breath steady, but under the surface, his muscles had braced. He was a fortress. But even fortresses have limits. The murmurs in the crowd turned into quiet debates. Some voices were hushed with concern, others sharp with disapproval. "This guy's out of control." An elderly man grumbled from behind his sunglasses. "Somebody needs to shut him down," the woman beside him whispered, clinging to her partner's sleeve. But Jack wasn't listening. He didn't hear them. Maybe he didn't care. He was too caught up in his own drama, playing to the crowd with every smug word and bold move. Behind him, his friends exchanged anxious looks. One of them, a tall man in a faded varsity jacket, stepped forward, hesitantly. "Jack, come on." "Enough. These guys don't mess around." "This isn't just some game." Jack snorted and waved him off with a scoff. "Relax. They're props. Actors. They're not going to do anything." And with that, he swung a leg over the barrier and stepped onto sacred ground. The crowd gasped. One sharp, unified inhale, like the whole plaza had been stunned, silent. Jack raised his fists and fell into a fighting stance. It was fluid, practiced years of training on full display. He snapped a few air punches clean and fast, each strike slicing the air with precision. "All right, folks," he shouted. "Time for a real lesson in defense." The crowd was paralyzed. Some watched, horrified by the audacity. Others couldn't look away, caught in the undeniable pull of a moment that had gone far beyond spectacle and was now teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Phones were held high, some capturing every second, while others shouted out with growing urgency. "Cut it out. This isn't the place for your circus act." But Jack was locked in his own world, too drunk on the spotlight to notice the disapproval swirling around him. His voice boomed across the plaza in front of the White House, each shout more exaggerated, each move more theatrical. "Guardsmen, ready yourselves," he bellowed, lunging forward with over-the-top flair. Richard didn't blink. He stood as motionless as a granite monument, his stare locked ahead, unwavering. The pressure was mounting all around him, thick as southern summer heat. The crowd held its breath like a congregation in the moment before a prayer, frozen in anticipation. The only sounds breaking the oppressive quiet were the whispers of wind and the thud of adrenaline-pounding hearts. Jack alone seemed certain of the outcome, or at least he convinced himself he was. The tension was electric, thick enough to snap. He whipped his head toward Richard, his swagger growing with every step. "All right, mannequin," he taunted, voice slicing through the stillness. Time to move. He threw a flurry of air punches in Richard's direction, his fists cutting through the space between them, theatrical and taunting. Still Richard's composure held, not a twitch, not a blink. But in those pale, unflinching eyes was a quiet warning, a silent testament to a lifetime of training calm on the surface ready underneath. Jack fed off the tension. The cameras, the crowd, the drama, they were oxygen to his ego. He flashed a grin, wide and arrogant, basking in his self-made spotlight. Off to the side, his friends were no longer amused. One, a lanky man in a backward baseball cap, muttered under his breath, "He's pushing it way too far now." But Jack didn't hear or didn't care. He was high on his own performance. "Fine," he shouted. "If you won't move, I'll show you how a real fighter strikes." And then in the blink of an eye, it happened. Jack launched himself forward, spinning into a high kick aimed squarely at Richard's shoulder. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, and someone shrieked, "Stop him!" But before Jack's foot could connect, Richard moved, and he moved like a force unleashed. Calm turned to storm in an instant, with a swift sidestep and flawless timing. Richard caught Jack's leg mid-air. The motion was seamless, clean, military to the core. The crowd erupted. Cheers and cries broke the silence. Some stunned by what they'd seen, others cheering with wild admiration. No one had expected the stoic guard to strike back with such grace, such speed, such absolute control. Jack stumbled, eyes wide, the arrogance vanishing from his face as reality crashed in. Richard didn't let go. He pivoted, using Jack's own weight against him, and with one sharp movement sent him crashing to the pavement. Jack hit the ground with a heavy thud, hands scraping instinctively to soften the fall. The cockiness he wore so proudly scattered with him on the concrete. And then Richard was still. Again, back in position, back to silence, gaze fixed forward like nothing had happened. The transformation stunned the crowd. "Did you see that?" He didn't even flinch. One woman cried, "That's some next-level discipline," someone else exclaimed. All around, voices buzzed, a mix of disbelief and awe. Jack scrambled to his feet, face flushed deep red, no longer the showman but the humbled fool. He stared at Richard, trying to piece together what had just happened. You didn't even give me a warning," he stammered, but his voice was swallowed by the growing murmur of the crowd. Richard said nothing. His face was unreadable, carved from stillness, but his eyes held one unmistakable message. "Don't try that again." The crowd surged with excitement, some replaying the scene on their phones, others retelling the moment like a legend being born. A voice rang out from the crowd, sharp and unapologetic. "That's what you get, moron. Mess with the guard, and you get served." But Jack, dazed and bruised, both in body and ego, turned numbly toward his group of friends. Though his pride had been thoroughly crushed, the full weight of what was coming hadn't yet landed. What had started as amusement and confusion among the tourists in front of the White House now erupted into a surge of emotion, half triumph, half righteous fury. The very moment Richard had expertly brought Jack down, the mood shifted like a tide snapping into a storm. The crowd roared with applause and loud cheers for the guardsman. "Now that's how you handle business," someone shouted from near the front. "That's discipline in action," another added with enthusiasm. Jack, still splayed awkwardly on the pavement, looked stunned, like someone who'd woken up mid-nightmare. Whatever athletic pride or air of superiority he had carried with him was scattered across the concrete. He raised his hands in a shaky gesture of surrender, trying to salvage a scrap of dignity. "This is all just a misunderstanding," he called out, his voice quivering. "Come on, it was a joke. You're all taking it too seriously." But the crowd wasn't interested in excuses. Their murmurs grew louder, harsher. Suddenly, from behind the perimeter fencing, 2 U.S. federal security officers emerged with precision and intent. Leading the way was a tall, composed man in his early 40s. His posture was ramrod straight, and his steel-gray suit was pressed so crisply it almost shimmered in the sun. His eyes were cool, calculating the gaze of a man used to authority and command. Following close behind was a younger officer holding a radio, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd as they approached. The sea of people hushed immediately, parting instinctively to give way. It was clear something serious was about to go down. Jack, still scrambling to get to his feet, looked up and locked eyes with the lead officer. There was no anger in the man's face, no raised voice or dramatic gesture, just cold, clipped professionalism. He stopped just inches from Jack, leaned slightly in, and said with quiet finality, "Sir, you just assaulted a ceremonial officer in uniform. You are under arrest." The words hit the air like a gunshot. Gasps swept through the crowd, followed by an eruption of claps and cheers. "Serves him right," someone bellowed. "Disrespect, like that's gotta come with consequences." Another chimed in Jack's face, drained of color. Panic began to rise in his voice. "I didn't mean it. It was all a joke, just a little demonstration. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The younger officer stepped in, already holding a pair of handcuffs which he applied swiftly and without hesitation. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The senior officer continued, his voice sharp as a blade, giving Jack no room to argue. The crowd pressed closer, still keeping a respectful distance, but their voices were no longer hushed. "Let this be a lesson," a man in a Yankees cap shouted. "You don't come here and act like a fool." Dozens of phones captured every angle, the rise and humiliating fall of Jack Randall, karate champ turned cautionary tale. For someone who had once basked in the attention, Jack now found himself suffocated by it. His face, once smug and full of swagger, was now etched with humiliation and dread. "Listen, I'll apologize. Okay, it was a joke," he called out, desperate to rewind time, but his words were drowned beneath the growing wave of voices and camera shutters. Without delay, the officers pulled him to his feet and began leading him toward a black patrol car idling nearby. The crowd opened a narrow path, their eyes following Jack's every reluctant step. His head dropped low, cheeks flushed red, doing everything he could to avoid the dozens of recording lenses pointed at him. "This ain't your damn dojo," a woman shouted as he passed. "You'll learn real quick. They don't play games out here," an older man added, holding his phone high to document the scene. Jack stopped protesting. His shoulders slumped in defeat, and he allowed himself to be escorted away. A far cry from the cocky showman who had strutted into the square just minutes before. Behind the wall of spectators, Richard Hunt remained unmoved, still standing tall in his post, unshaken by the chaos he had quietly and masterfully neutralized. He didn't flinch, didn't smirk. He simply stood. His scarlet tunic caught the sunlight once more, a gleaming emblem of honor and strength. And as the crowd looked back at him, the respect in their eyes was unmistakable. He hadn't just held the line, he had reminded them what it meant. That day carved itself into public memory as a sobering reminder. The guard stationed at the White House isn't just a photo op for curious tourists, but a living embodiment of discipline, pride, and unwavering resolve, principles not to be toyed with or tested without facing real consequences. Within an hour of the incident, the internet erupted. Clips of Jack Randall, once a decorated karate champion, being effortlessly outmaneuvered and brought down by the poised and silent Richard Hunt, spread like wildfire. The footage blazed across platforms from TikTok to Facebook, stitched into reaction videos, memes, and news segments. "This is unreal. That guard's the real deal," read one of the top comments. "Dude should have known better. These guys aren't Disneyland mascots," chimed another. Hashtags exploded across timelines. Respect the guard, #GuardVs, karate, #tourist fail, tradition over ego. What began as a viral moment quickly evolved into a national talking point. Morning news shows aired the clip on loop with headlines like "Tourist provokes guard responds" and "How arrogance crushed a champion." Editorials were written. Pundits debated decorum, entitlement, and the symbolism of the guard in modern America. Meanwhile, far from the buzz of likes and shares, Jack sat alone in a holding cell. The cold, metallic walls, the flickering fluorescent lights. It was a stark contrast to the world he thought he dominated just hours earlier. He caught his reflection in the brushed steel sink, but he didn't recognize the man looking back. Gone was the bravado, the swagger. What stared at him now was someone humbled, defeated not just by a guard, but by his own hubris. Across from him, his attorney stood with a manila folder tucked under one arm and a look of growing frustration. "You realize this isn't just some viral video anymore, right?" he said flatly. "This is national news. People are demanding accountability. You need to apologize." "Officially," Jack dropped his head and sighed. The air in the cell felt heavier by the second. "Yeah, I get it. I messed up. But they could have handled it differently." His voice wavered still, trying to frame himself as misunderstood. The lawyer didn't flinch. "This wasn't a simple mistake, Jack. This was a public disaster. If you want any shot at reclaiming your reputation or your freedom, you need to take responsibility fully." The following morning, under legal pressure, and with the weight of public backlash mounting like a tidal wave, Jack issued a formal apology. Cameras flashed as he sat stiffly behind a plain table, dressed in a dark suit that looked borrowed, his face locked in a strained expression. "I want to offer a sincere apology," he said into the lens. "To the guard, to Officer Richard Hunt, and to the American public. What I did was thoughtless, disrespectful, and reckless. I deeply regret it, but redemption doesn't come easily in the court of public opinion. Now, he's sorry. That's rich." A viewer tweeted, "Regret doesn't erase arrogance," added another. His apology came across to many as forced a box checked under pressure, not a turning point born of genuine remorse. While Jack's fall from grace continued to unfold online, Richard Hunt's image began to rise. Solid, dependable, unshaken. The man who said nothing, who moved only when duty demanded it, became a symbol of what it meant to wear the uniform with honor. Comments flooded social feeds. That's what a real professional looks like. Respect to Richard. A true American sentinel. His stillness had spoken louder than any speech Jack could have delivered. The guard soon released a rare public statement. It read, "We do not stand simply for ceremony, but as defenders of the values that define this country. Behavior that disrespects our duty and dishonors the uniform will never be tolerated. The consequences will be real and lasting." And in the days that followed, as the story continued to trend, Jack remained the unwitting face of a cautionary tale. How pride unchecked when challenged by quiet strength always loses. Newspapers across the country splashed bold headlines across their front pages. The fall of a karate champion. When ego meets tradition. How arrogance led to public shame. And Richard Hunt, the unsung hero in uniform. The story ignited a nationwide conversation, one that reached far beyond martial arts or military protocol. It became a cultural touchstone, a loud and lasting reminder that tradition is not to be mocked, and that those who serve it deserve respect, not ridicule. Jack Randall's name, once tied to glory in sports circles, had transformed into a cautionary punchline, the embodiment of what happens when confidence tips into contempt. Inside the Washington, D.C. courthouse, the tension was electric. Every seat in the gallery was filled mostly by reporters clutching notebooks and adjusting camera angles, all ready to broadcast the story dubbed the Karate Champion Trial. Jack sat at the defense table like a man unraveling, his shoulders hunched, hands clenched tightly in his lap, his eyes glued to the cold tile floor. Gone was the bravado, the swagger. What sat there now was a man stripped of all performance. The judge, an imposing older man with a thick gray mustache and eyes that had seen too many stories like this unfold, peered over the rim of his glasses. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority as he began. "We are convened to hear the matter of Mr. Jack Randall, charged with assaulting a member of the Honor Guard." Jack's attorney stood voice steady, posture deliberate. "Your Honor, what occurred was an unfortunate lapse in judgment. My client's actions were rooted in immaturity, not malice. It was meant as a prank, not a threat. The judge didn't respond right away. He simply looked back down at the file, then slowly raised his eyes to Jack. "A prank," he repeated, voice like frost. "What I saw on video was a man willfully crossing a security barrier, taunting a service member, and delivering what appeared to be a calculated attack. That is not a joke. That is a crime." The courtroom held its breath. Reporters scratched pens across paper with urgency, while camera shutters snapped in rapid succession. One by one, eyewitnesses took the stand. A woman in a navy blue blazer and heels, calm but resolute, gave her account. He was clearly provoking the guard. She said, "You could see it wasn't just playful. He meant to escalate." We were all watching him ramp up the tension. Then came the video footage. Surveillance angles paired with smartphone recordings showed Jack's movements in brutal clarity, his smirk, the swing of his leg, and Richard Hunt's flawless response. Murmurs rose through the crowd like a storm building at sea until the judge brought down his gavel. Order in the court. Finally turning to Jack, the judge delivered his ruling. "Your actions were not only reckless, they were deeply disrespectful. You did not just attack a man, Mr. Randall. You dishonored what he stands for. I hereby sentence you to 6 months in federal custody for assault and public misconduct. Let this be a warning, not only to you, but to anyone who believes they are above accountability." The courtroom buzzed with reaction. A ripple of applause broke out on one side while others leaned in to whisper about whether the sentence had gone too far. Jack sat still, face pale, lips pressed together. No tears, no outrage, just the quiet shock of someone who had finally hit a wall that wouldn't move for charm or strength. Outside, a swarm of journalists and onlookers gathered along the courthouse steps. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit told the nearest mic, "This was absolutely the right call. You can't just treat institutions like stage props." Another woman called out, "Respect matters. Tradition matters." Though a few voices murmured that the punishment might have been too severe, there was overwhelming agreement on one thing. The message had landed loud and clear. You don't cross the line and walk away without consequences. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of this incredible story. A story that wasn't just about one man's fall from pride, but about another's quiet strength. What happened between Jack Randall and Richard Hunt wasn't just a viral moment. It was a modern parable about ego respect and what it truly means to carry honor on your shoulders. Richard Hunt didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He didn't even speak. But in his silence, in his unshakable composure, he said, more than 1,000 words ever could, he represented the very best of what service and discipline are about. While Jack tried to turn a sacred space into his stage, Richard reminded us through pure presence alone that some lines are not for show, they are meant to be protected. This story carries an important lesson, not just for those who wear a uniform, but for all of us. In a world where loudness is often mistaken for strength, Richard showed us the power of restraint, the power of quiet dignity. And maybe, just maybe, we all need a little more of that in our lives. If this story made you feel something, if it made you reflect or reminded you of the value of respect, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the punishment was fair? What would you have done in Richard's place? And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real moments, real people, and real lessons that speak to the soul. Until next time, take care of each other and remember, true strength doesn't need to shout.